Okay, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Wednesday, November 27th. And yeah, I feel like the mood has changed a lot since Biden approved the long-range missile attack strikes into Russia and this Oresnik strike. Everything's gotten darker, and it seems like it's still
Yeah.
getting that way. Right now, I've even heard NATO is discussing the possibility of preemptive strikes against Russia. This is from Admiral Robert Bauer. There's even been talks coming. I forget who said. Maybe you can let me know that the U.S. is ready for a nuclear exchange. And I heard from Lavrov, Moscow is ready to is going to retaliate against Kiev's ATACMS missiles attacks. Kiev and NATO's ATACMS missiles. So, what do you make of all this? Where are we headed right now?
Yeah. Well, it is a genuinely alarming situation, as I was saying in our last episode. And yeah, we are escalating. Um, it looked like NATO was, in particular, the Pentagon was holding the line, but eventually that line on the missile restrictions that has been crossed, and as we've said many times, and others have said, that was a very important line. And when those first ATACMS were fired at Bryansk, just about a week ago, that was the first time ever that NATO attacked Russia, and it did. That's what happened. And, the Russians have been crystal clear about it. And in general, there's just been a news blackout, of course, about it in the West. But it has gotten through. Like I said, the Le Monde, which is like the New York Times of France, it actually published an article acknowledging the truth of this. Um, but yeah, anyway, yeah, we have gone up this escalation ladder. And of course, the Russians responded with the Oresnik attack. It was just an awesome demonstration of a true wonder weapon. Um, it was something like out of a science fiction movie. I think we've all seen the video. And the point, of course, the hope on the part of the Russian government was to sober up the Western governments. Is to say, look, we're not messing around, and we have this new capability. So let's just cut this off. Okay, let's cut this out rather. No more ATACMS, no more storm shadows. But then just a few days afterwards, and ATACMS were used. I believe there were 8 ATACMS were used to strike a facility in Kursk. So they have not gotten the message, or they have ignored the message from Putin. And Putin, not Putin himself, but the Russian Ministry of Defense and Lavrov have already said that they're going to retaliate, and they're going to retaliate soon to this most recent attack on Russia by NATO. So yeah, we are in very dangerous territory. So it's not surprising that we're getting, uh, people in the West, they're not informed, but I think the Resnik attack must have gotten their attention, and has really created a certain amount of alarm and even panic within the West. So we're seeing headlines like this. I don't know how seriously we should take them. It may be that in many cases, I think actually, as Simplicius the thinker pointed out very clearly, more than pointed out, he demonstrated that a lot of these headlines are actually based on very little. They're exaggerations. But I think the headlines reflect a reality, and that there is a real concern on even something like a growing panic within the West. Unfortunately, they their concern, should lead to sober reflection and to de-escalation. But that the West seems to be incapable of that. So we're going up the escalation ladder, and who knows where it's going to stop.
Okay, so you said that Le Monde, at least the French language newspaper, has admitted that
Yeah, at
these
least in one
missiles.
article, right?
Right. Is there any English language publication that has stated this fact, or are we still just kind of just denying this, or just
Yeah, not to my
ignoring this?
knowledge. I think, again, Olaf Scholz actually openly acknowledged this fact a few months ago. And if you recall, also there was a recording of those German generals talking about striking the Kursk bridge with Taurus missiles, and they openly acknowledge it in their secret, conversation that was leaked by the Russians. So, there have been Western, there was Olaf Scholz and Le Monde. I don't think not that any English language news source or politician has acknowledged this fact, not to my knowledge,
Yeah, there's always that quote, the first casualty of war is the truth. And it's really true. I was watching BBC News last night just for a little bit, and they were doing some coverage of the Ukraine war. And they said that this attack and missile strike that was very effective. And I believe it is true from what I gather. I don't know, maybe you can tell me that they hit a radar installation, destroyed some air defense systems. So there was a lot of bravado talk about how effective these long range attacks are. They also said that Russia is losing up to 50,000 troops per month now, over 12,000 a week. And the anchor even asked the person, this military guy, if they believe that Ukraine is going to be going on the offensive soon. Like this, it's just a completely different world.
Yeah. You're right. I know. I'm aware of that. I've never seen it, to this extent. Over the last 10, 15 years, I've been shaking my head at the media. There's all kinds of false information and, distortion of the reality. But it's reached just unprecedented levels since the outbreak of this war. And it's not just that it's an alternate reality, but it's a polar opposite reality. I mean, it's just so, it's an absolute, mirror reflection of the mirror image of the truth. Yeah. And for anybody that really digs into the, into the reality, or even but people like even honest Ukraine supporters like Julian Rodke of, I believe it's Bild in Germany. He said he's been ringing the alarm bell and say, we are losing this war. And, he describes specific incidents. These people just they don't have any interest in the reality, in the granular reality, the battles that are being fought village by village. And, if they were, I've noticed that just in looking at the mainstream news feeds, which I do regularly just to get a sense of what the Western public is actually reading. There's never any talk of these battles. It's like that it's just Russia's about to collapse. Ukraine just did something incredible. That's all it is. But these, the real war is being fought in the southern Donbass, and it's being lost quite dramatically by anybody who's paying attention. And you have to say, to Julian Rodke's credit, he's paying attention. But they don't even bother to look and see what's happening on the ground. So they just get fed this information, and it's not just the media, but apparently a lot of military officials. They refuse to listen to anything the Russians say because they're the enemy, they're evil, and they just take unskeptically accept everything that the Ukrainians feed them. And the Ukrainians are just feeding them this increasingly wild nonsense. Again, the North Korean story continues to not just to persist, but to expand and to be embellished, and it just never stops. And now they're talking about Yemeni soldiers that have been basically kidnapped from Yemen and sent to the whole thing is so bizarre, but they're doing it and they're getting away with it. And you're getting serious people, on generals and, other military officials saying that, well, of course we have to do this because of the North Korean soldiers. And now the Yemenis are coming, where are they? I'll tell you, someday it'll all die away and they won't talk about it anymore. And then you just hope that some people say, what happened to those North Korean soldiers? Were they ever there?
Right. Yeah. My question was how did they get away with it? Because I felt like in this day and age with social media, communications that we have now, that I was under the impression that propaganda they couldn't control the narrative like they could back in the day when there was 3 or 4 media sources. But obviously they're struggling a bit, but clearly they are controlling the media. You can see that they are controlling the narrative. It seems to still be very effective. I I can understand in the beginning, everybody's a little bit confused. You have the fog of war, but this war has been going on. We're coming up to 3 years now. And I felt like after the counteroffensive, people would start to wake up and realize that this isn't going the way that we were told it was going to go. But still, they just keep on,
it's quite remarkable. But it's clear that the great majority of people, the average consumer of news, it just does not read things rigorously, does not have any kind of memory, is constantly exposed to these headlines and these misleading stories. And, if they stop, like I was saying the other day, even if you limit yourself to Western news sources, you can realize that they're lying if you really, stop and think about it. Apparently there's this new weapon system that's going to do incredible things. Well, follow up, wait and see what happens. They'll stop talking about it because it does nothing. They breached the Russian lines. I remember that a claim was made during the 2023 summer offensive, right? Well, they breached, where are they now? But then that story just goes away. These stories, these headlines appear, they're just kind of like little bubbles rising to the surface. They pop and they die. But most people just don't have much, just do not concentrate, do not think rigorously, do not really pay attention, do not have a memory. And so the bubbles just sort of constantly give them this impression of Ukrainian competence and innovation and overall success, and the opposite of Russia. And then, of course, you would think, I've been hearing stories about how Russia is about to collapse for years and years now. And they're still coming out, and there's still serious people are making this claim, Russia is about to collapse, right? But, people hear that, oh, Russia's about to collapse. They don't stop and think, well, didn't I hear that 5 years ago? Didn't I hear that 10 years ago?
People aren't listening, I guess.
Yeah.
Do we know what damage the Oresnik caused?
We don't know for sure. The Ukrainians have cordoned off the area and are not letting any media in, which is a sign that it did a lot of damage. If it did very little damage, I think they would be, providing tours to Western journalists, right? So I think right there, that's a very strong indication that quite a bit of damage was done. And they haven't released, high resolution satellite photos. Again, similar to like what we saw in after the Israeli strike or attempted strike on Iran. There all kinds of claims were made, but then we just never saw the evidence. They're trying to hide the evidence, which suggests that actually a lot of damage was done. And in fact, there are some reports from eyewitnesses or people who claim to be eyewitnesses. Actually, people who live nearby the plant or maybe work at the plant and have went in afterwards. These have not been confirmed, but they say that the place was just obliterated. The important workshops were absolutely destroyed. And I think that these workshops, in fact, were underground. This plant had been attacked before. Many times, but by conventional Russian missiles. And the damage had always been relatively superficial because it was to the surface plant. And these underground levels were always spared. But this time you said, I think I read a description this morning, you could see a hole. You walk into the warehouse and you just see a hole in the ground. And then if you try to go down, you just find that everything below those levels down there was just totally obliterated. So these weapons just pierced right to the ground and went deep into the ground and exploded and just completely took out. If these reports, are true.
Yeah, I was listening to Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, and he said that the Oresnik, this new weapon development here, technology, is comparable to the Manhattan Project in terms of a game changer. Maybe that's hyperbole, but that's what he said. And, I feel like most of the Western population don't believe that this was anything special. There's, I post some of these clips of us talking about it, and you use the words like, this is a wonder weapon. It's a game changer. A lot of people are like, oh, the U.S. has stuff like this. There's nothing. This is tech from the 70s. This is nothing new. So can you explain again why this is such a game changer? What makes this such an extreme development that
Right.
should that would let someone like Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson say that
Right.
this is as big an event since the Manhattan Project or comparable
Right.
to the Manhattan Project?
Right. Well, first of all, this is truly hypersonic. The missile itself travels at hypersonic speeds, and then importantly, the reentry vehicles, of which there are 6, and each of which has 6 submunitions. So we're talking about 36 explosive charges. All of these travel, descend from through the atmosphere at hypersonic speeds at least Mach 10, Mach 10 through Mach 12. So even if they did not have an explosive charge, they're traveling so fast that just the impact of any object traveling at that speed causes tremendous damage. It can, one of those without an explosive charge still can create a huge crater, but they do. And because they travel at those speeds, there is simply no way to defend against them. That's the thing, is that, both the U.S. and Russia have these older ICBMs, of course, which can just wipe out cities, but they don't travel at hypersonic speeds. So there's at least a chance that these missiles can be intercepted, but there's just no chance that this one can be intercepted. So it just means that, and it has a range that allows it to strike any city in Europe. So in other words, now all of Europe is just completely naked, completely vulnerable. And then, the fact is that, well, they don't need to use nuclear weapons. I believe it's nuclear capable. Some people were saying that it wasn't, but most seem to agree that it is nuclear capable. But they don't need to. I mean, the fact is, you can see it can do tremendous. So that kind of lowers the threshold and makes it easier for the Russians to use it. And that's what they've used it once. They said they're going to use it again. I think we're going to see another strike. Most people agree that this will probably again occur within Ukraine. Again, the Russians want to escalate slowly, cautiously, just hope that the Europeans back off. I don't know what the target would be, but if NATO continues to fire these missiles into Russian territory, I think that we're going to see a strike on outside of Ukraine on NATO territory. I think that's inevitable. I think we're looking at very high probability that will happen, and then I don't know what's going to come next. I don't think, unfortunately, every indication that we've had so far is that the West will not sober up, but they will respond to this with further escalations. So, we are headed into some very frightening territory.
Right. It sounds like that's, exactly where we're heading. It doesn't seem like there's any off ramp. We're going to continue firing these ATACMS. It seems like the goal is escalation from the West. Do you think that is the goal at this point? I mean, well, like what base?
I just don't think these people are thinking very clearly. Like they're losing, they know it, and that's why they're doing this, right? They're crossing their own red lines, before they say, oh, we don't need to do this, this wonder weapon will work. But obviously everything has failed. That's why they're doing this. Previous failures. And they just simply cannot admit to themselves that, that Russia is stronger than they are, and that they made a huge mistake by, choosing to launch this proxy war against Russia. They just can't. So they're just throwing everything out, including the bathroom sink, as the old saying goes. Even when it just doesn't make sense. And often their own militaries, the more sane militaries among them, are telling them this is not going to work. They're just not listening. They're just throwing everything out there. And I think that's what we're going to see after, these won't make any difference. The ATACMS won't. But what they'll probably then remove the restrictions on the JASSMs, which are air-launched cruise missiles. That there are 2 versions of it. One has a 300-kilometer range, so it's very similar to the ATACMS. Now that one, I think it would be even less useful than the ATACMS because they're air-launched, and again, Ukraine barely has an air force. We're talking about single digits now. And these these aircraft can't get anywhere close to the front lines because they'll be shot down. So they will have to fire from well within Ukraine, and so they're not going to have much range. And then again, air-launched missiles tend to have smaller warheads, so they're just not going to do as much damage. But there is a so-called extended range version of the JASSM, and that can go 900 kilometers. So that, even if it's fired from an aircraft well within Ukraine, could hit Moscow and beyond. And that potentially, again, the Russians will figure out a way to neutralize it, but especially at the start, there's a chance that something will get through and do some serious damage, and that will be a further escalation.
Oh, man. So it seems like that our goal is just escalation. I mean, you're saying we don't have a plan, but it has to be escalation, right? That's what they want.
I think there are some people among them, but these people, they just don't think clearly. I don't think any of them foresaw this. They really thought that Russia was going to collapse like a house of cards at the beginning. The combination of the economic sanctions and the proxy war was just going to destroy Russia. That's what they really believed. And then they really thought that, man, okay, now we're going to use the HIMARS and the Abrams and whatever. I think they really believed it. They're not thinking clearly. They're just in a constant state of hysteria. And so it's like, they don't even see it as escalation. It's just that they're supporting Ukraine. This didn't work. We'll give them that. We'll give them that. But it's really obviously it's crystal clear to us, to us, and to any sane person that they are escalating. But in their own minds, they're not even thinking that clearly.
So you think in the minds of Western politicians, they don't think they're escalating? Their goal isn't escalation. They're just like, we just support Ukraine. This mantra.
I don't think that's their goal. That's not the way they really see it. We just have to support Ukraine. That's right. And they never stop and think, is this actually going to make a difference? Like, did the last one work? Why will this one work and the last one didn't work? They obviously are not going through that, because if they did, they wouldn't do it. Right? It's just like, these are absurd decisions, like the decision to send the ATACMS, which is, there could not possibly be any kind of argument to support it. It just does not exist, but they did it. And I think they just, these politicians just think, we got to be strong. The only reason we're losing is that we were putting too many constraints on ourselves. We got to take the gloves off and show it to the Russians. That's the way they talk. That's the way they think. But it's
right.
Yeah, but that's not the reality.
I think that what I'm afraid is that these politicians, they're in too deep. They've made too many promises. They lied to their people for too long, that for them, they see the only way forward is, the only way through this is forward, is to just to continue to escalate.
Yeah, obviously.
And if that means World War III, so be it. But we have to win this. They've made it. They've convinced themselves that this is existential and that they have to beat Russia. They have to destroy it. So they'll do whatever they want. And so the escalation is the way forward. I think that's what they're thinking, right?
Yeah,
so it is.
Yeah. Well, right. Well, that's obviously what's happening. But they're not even thinking of that way. For them, they're always, the defenders, and Russia is always the aggressor. You'll see how things are reported. The U.S. never escalates. It's always Russia that escalates. So like with this Oresnik attack, that was a huge escalation. It wasn't a response to a NATO attack on Russian territory. It was never reported that way. So, that's how it's going to be presented. It's just like, Russia's getting more and more aggressive. We just have to stand stronger. Of course, they're escalating, and Russia is responding very cautiously to their escalations. But that's not the way they see it. That's not the way it's reported. For them, they're always, they're the morally superior ones. That's part of Western supremacist thinking.
So do you think then that Russia will actually strike within NATO territory in response to these attacks at some point?
I think there's a very high chance of it, because I think Russia will see an Oresnik strike shortly, within the next few days. And if the past is a guide to the future, and it almost certainly is, the West will ignore that, and they will launch other attacks into the Kursk region, and the Russians will be forced to go farther.
Why don't the Russians just take out Zelensky? Like, this thing could just demolish.
I don't think that would do him any good. What good would that do him?
I don't know, just end this thing in Ukraine quickly before so that the West doesn't have any Ukraine to support. Like that.
Yeah.
I almost feel like that's what has to happen. We got to have a new.
Right. Okay. Well, taking out Zelensky doesn't do anything. You're just going to have somebody equally crazy take his place. I mean, assassinations in general do not ever help a situation like this.
That's true. The Israelis have taught us that. So.
Right. Exactly. And. If anything, like if you got Zaluzhny in there, I think Zaluzhny, he's a Banderite, he's an evil Banderite, but he's more realistic and he knows how to fight a war better than Zelensky does. Zelensky is all PR, right? He's all smoke and mirrors. So he's just like, he's throwing all his best men and equipment into Kursk, which doesn't make a bit of sense. But that's what he's doing. And even these ATACMS missiles, they could do more good on the Donbass front, where the real war is being fought, right? But instead, he's firing them into the Kursk region, which is just a sideshow. It's just a place where Ukrainian soldiers go to die. And Zaluzhny probably might really close it down, and he would fight it more. He would still lose, but he would be able to put up a stronger resistance and slow the Russian advance. So if anything, it's great for the Russians to have Zelensky in charge.
Everything you're telling me shows you're not giving me any off ramps here to be hopeful for, Dad. Is there anything that we can hope for? Is there anything
I was hopeful before, especially again, I've said that when the Pentagon just put its foot down and said, no, we're not doing this, and then they held firm. That's when I was hopeful. I thought, because I've always thought, I've seen them escalating. I thought, well, maybe at some point they'll stop. They'll get to the edge of the abyss and they'll stop, right? And I was hoping maybe that was the point, but it clearly wasn't. And they've taken a big step towards the edge of the abyss with this, and we're now peering down into the abyss. And I don't see any place they're going to stop. Maybe the next stopping point is going to be use of nuclear weapons. I think that they're going to keep on escalating right up to that point, and I just hope that at that point they say, "Oh, we can't do this." Okay, let's not end the world.
That's not a. I mean, is there an option? Like, couldn't China do something? I mean, this is obviously should be getting scary for everybody in the world now, right? Couldn't China just be like, we're not sending any more, shipping any more spoons to Europe, and all of a sudden the Brits are like, I can't eat my blood pudding or whatever it is they eat over there, and then they throw up their arms and like, oh man, we don't have any spoons in this country. Like, is there something that these countries can do, other countries can do to put pressure on the West to see reason, be like, hey, you guys need to
nobody.
Let's don't blow up the world.
Yeah, I don't see it. I just don't see it. I can't see how that could happen or who could do that.
The scary thing to me is that for the West, the only card that they have to play that could make a difference is the nuclear option. They don't seem to have anything else. And so that's what's scary. They're just going to keep on throwing things until they get to that point. And will they push that button? Because if they had the same technology that Russia had, things would be different. Another thing that I heard, I think was from Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson as well, was that the development of the Russian missile actually lowers, and I think you mentioned as well, lowers the nuclear threshold. Because you no longer need to drop nuclear bombs to destroy enemy assets or command centers. These things can't be shot down. Putin even said, we'll give you a warning so you can evacuate all your civilians and personnel out of there before. But we can just destroy any type of infrastructure. Even if it's hidden 50 meters under the ground, this will go through it and blow it up. So we can just hit anything, and we don't need to blow up the city. So
we can say we'll tell you what we're going to hit, and we'll tell you ahead of time. There's nothing you can do about it.
Right. Yeah. What a boss move, that you're able to do something like that. Right. But the U.S. doesn't have that. So our option is, that's why we're talking about preemptive strikes, which, we've already been striking Russia for a while, so I don't know how preemptive you'd say that is, but that's crazy talk. And then I've even heard talk about sending nuclear weapons to Ukraine. I hopefully that's just headline, just get people fear-mongering, but...
That was the New York Times. It's not clear. I mean, it's very vague. They said, some officials, like whoever that reporter was talking about it, mentioned it. I don't think there's serious talk about that, but who knows?
Yeah, and I feel like we're correct in our analysis of the situation, but like I said, when I turn on BBC or go online and read mainstream media, or if you go to Reddit, my God, Reddit is just so anti-Russia, pro-Ukraine. That sometimes I'm wondering, like, it is just it's true. I understand how that media narrative works, because you get wrapped into it, and then all of a sudden that's all you hear.
Yeah, and it just seems like it's real. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody knows. Like, I'm the only guy who doesn't know. There must be something wrong with me. Yeah.
Right. And if I stand there too long, I begin to question myself. I'm like, what? Is my dad just full of it? And then, and then,
well, just take the but again, you just have to be truly skeptical and rigorous in your thinking. And you hear them talking about, Korean soldiers, and the Korean soldiers did this, and just so many of them were killed, and a general was injured, and they're watching porn, but now they got a bunch of them got drunk and fought with the Russians, and it's just a few of them have defected already, and it just goes on and on. Incredible. You say, let's see some evidence. Let's see some actual evidence, and there just has not been any evidence. And then also ask yourself, does this make any sense? Why would the Russians want to send 10,000 North Korean soldiers into the battle when they don't have any interoperability, and they themselves have, hundreds of thousands of soldiers in reserves? Why would they want to do this? And so it's just on every level, it doesn't make sense. But people talk about it as reality, but you have to stop and pick apart what they're talking about.
Right, but it can be hard, because if you're watching BBC News, you'd be like, well, Russia's losing 50,000 troops a month. They don't have any men left. That's what's they're being fed. That's why they need North Koreans to come in to backfill all this devastation that Ukraine is wreaking on the Russian army. Yeah, I mean, that's basically the impression that you've been given.
Another thing is, you'll hear that, the Russians just expended, have shown appalling disregard for their own lives. They say they use these human wave tactics. If there were human wave tactics, there should be hundreds of videos. Just like, we have hundreds and hundreds of videos of press gangs in Ukraine, grabbing people off the streets. So it's a reality. And they're coming from Ukrainian channels too. Well, we should have hundreds of videos of human wave tactics. If in fact there are these appalling losses on the Russian side. There's not one. Because it's not happening. Again, it's not like people don't have smartphones that can record these things, or there aren't drones flying over the front, taking, because we see all kinds of things all the time. But why have we never seen any human wave tactics? That it's just talked about. It's just an established fact. We know that's what they use, and they just. In fact, the reverse is true. It's just that the reason that the Russians have been advancing slowly. Of course, they've been advancing a lot faster recently, but overall, they haven't been rushing through. Is that they're actually very careful to conserve human lives. Remember, these are all the vast majority of them are volunteers. And Putin. There's all the talk about him being some mad dictator. No, he was elected. It was an overwhelming support, but there's reason that he's popular, and he wants to stay popular. He does not want to, he doesn't want, body bags and coffins going back to these villages all over. He's trying to conserve Russian lives, and he's been very successful at it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if there was, for example, like the human wave tactics, of course, they have drones. The West would want to play that 24/7 as proof of sort of the barbarity of Russia. So, Well, I don't know. I'm getting worried, Dad. I just.
Well, it is very scary. It is. I think I'll go back to something I said. I think maybe even been a couple of months ago. It's like what makes me. I think the main reason to be hopeful about this is the fact that, in fact, the West does not have capacity to wage war against Russia. In the end, they are a paper tiger, and that each one of these escalations is going to fizzle. They have, so they'll keep on going up the escalation ladder until they get to the nuclear. And I just hope at that point they realize that they can't do anything.
Right.
I believe, maybe I shouldn't be so hopeful, but I believe at that point they'll say, okay, enough is enough. Let's just, we've got to call this off. We just can't go down that route. They understand that if they fire nuclear missiles at Russia, that's the end of Western civilization. And I think that they will stop at that point. These people are really stupid. They're hysterical. They are. They're victims of their own narrative and so on and so forth. But I don't think they're like the Israeli leadership that is just is truly genocidal and apocalyptic in its thinking. I don't think the Israelis would hesitate to use a nuclear weapon if they began to lose, but I think that the West will stop at that point. I think that we'll see a difference. And so I think they were going to have a very scary ride right up to the true edge of the abyss, and they're going to totter there. And then I think the West will step back at that point. But it's going to be a very, very scary ride, and things could go wrong.
Well, there's a lot of I thinks in there that that are kind of like.
Right. Yeah. Well, what can I say?
I know. But I'm not knocking you. But it's just scary to think that we're going to go right up to the nuclear weapon, the nuclear option, and then we think that cooler heads will prevail.
Right.
I really hope so.
Right.
I think so. But let's say even if that does happen, we make it all the way up. We keep on. We send whatever we can. How much further can we escalate? I feel like we've kind of reached the peak of our escalation. Do we start sending troops?
Yeah. Well, you can talk about Tomahawk missiles. Again, as Zelensky's requested them, and it seems like everything Zelensky requests eventually gets. But again, it won't make a difference, and it's something that we just can't give them enough to make a difference. Look, I think in the last year, the Russians fired 4,000 missiles into Ukraine. Ukraine is it's a large country, but much smaller than Russia.
I think 6,000 actually is what I heard.
Well, I think over the course of the conflict, it's 6,000.
Oh, okay.
And maybe just 4,000 in a year. But in any case, we're talking about lots of missiles. And then, and now, according to some pretty good sources, I think it was Daniel Davis has connections to the Pentagon. Like at the very most, the West has like 150 Storm Shadows and ATACMS to spare. So we're talking about 150 against 4,000, right? And again, the other side has much better air defense and a much vaster territory. What's it going to do? And then the same thing with the Tomahawks. There's limited numbers, and they are a real crucial strategic missile for U.S. forces. They just can't spare that many. So even if they get up to that very advanced weapon that can strike deep into Russia, it will not do anything. They'll go up the escalation line. Nothing will make a difference. And then I think maybe the final thing is boots on the ground. And let's say they try that. Apparently the UK has about 20,000 combat soldiers, very poorly armed. They don't have real combat experience. They've been trained for the wrong kind of war. What are they going to do? They're not going to last. If Russia is taking out, according to the Russian MOD, they're taking out 2,000 soldiers a day on the average on the front. Basically, that's 10 days. Maybe these British soldiers will go even faster because they just have no idea what they're doing. And then the French only have some few more, but not much more than the British. They cannot put together a force that would make a bit of difference. And you say, well, and the thing is, again, this is part of their weakness. They don't really have the popular support. And if they say, okay, we need to start conscripting people, I think that would be the end. I don't think that their populations are going to go, no, I'm not going to go fight the Russians. And I think it stops right there. Then you have the question, are we going to use nuclear weapons? And I just don't think they're going to do it.
Okay, I hope
think they're
so.
At that point, they'll go into the fetal position and start sucking their thumbs.
I really hope so. But my fear is what scares me is when you said that you think that there's a good chance that Russia will strike somewhere within NATO. Yeah. I mean, you said that this next one, they'll probably hit a target again within Ukraine. But if it continues and we continue, which it seems like we are, Doesn't seem like we don't care about how many Ukrainians die and what infrastructure gets blown up in Ukraine. Blow them all to hell, apparently, is our position, you know.
Yeah.
But once they do, if they do strike somewhere within NATO, I think that will change the game, and they could be able to capitalize on that in terms of earn popular support, saying like, look, NATO is now under attack by Russia. We have to invoke Article 5. We have to defend ourselves against this Russian aggression. Yeah. You know, now this war has taken on, that Russia is directly attacking us. That's what they will say. And
they'll say,
that's
right.
That's where it gets a little scary for me.
Yeah, it does get scary. I'm not saying that there's, but I still think they're not going to be able to actually conscript large numbers of Europeans and send them off to the front. I think that, a lot of people will get online and say, damn those Russians or whatever, but then when they get the draft notice or their threat of a draft notice, they just say, I'm not doing this.
Okay, well, everything you said to me sounds plausible, so let's just assume that happens, that we keep on going up the escalation ladder, and from what you said, it sounds like there's only a few more steps on this ladder that we could take before we get to the top rung of the nuclear option. We stop at the nuclear option. Everybody, the NATO politicians adopt a fetal position and suck their thumbs, as you say. Then what happens? What happens to NATO? What happens to the West? Does the whole thing crumble? Do we have a collapse? Do we get new governments in place? How does this end?
No. Obviously sent huge political shockwaves through Europe, and to a lesser extent through the U.S. It's easier because the U.S. has a whole ocean between ourselves and the problem. It's easier for the U.S. to walk away from it, but it will be impossible for European politicians to walk away from it. It's going to cause huge shockwaves throughout Europe, and it may bring about the fall of European governance, and maybe we'll get the true dissident parties that have been growing in popularity and who want to make peace with Russia. Maybe they will take power. That's a rosy scenario, and I think there's a real possibility that will happen. The other possibility is that all these governments that have been showing increasing authoritarian tendencies in the West will just go down that road and say, oh, we now have to institute martial law, because now we have these parties within our country that are collaborating with the Russians, and that's how they talk about them already, and there already have been efforts to ban them, and that's maybe the road that they'll go down. We'll see. It's going to be very interesting.
Well, what about for America? I mean, do you think that this will be the end of the American empire?
It's not going to be the end of the American empire, but of course it will be a blow. But it'll be easier for the Americans to extricate themselves from it. We do have a history of walking away from conflicts. Of course, the best examples are Vietnam and Afghanistan, and they both ended disastrously for us. And it did cause some damage to the governments that were in charge at the time. But in the end, America went on. It wasn't anywhere close to a mortal blow. Now, this, of course, will be more serious. It certainly will. Because it's so clear that we went all the way up this escalation ladder. We threw everything at the Russians, and it I think you could say, like in the case of Afghanistan or Vietnam, these were never existential struggles for us, and they were very much. Well, war is a choice. You certainly can say that about Ukraine too, though. And it was, it could just be put off as a, mistake. In any case, they could say that, well, we could have won this war, but we just decided it wasn't worth the cost. And I think that's in fact true. If the Americans had decided to just go all in Vietnam, conscript another 1 million or 2 million soldiers and whatever, but it just wasn't worth the cost and would lead to all kinds of domestic unrest. So they just said, okay, we got to pull out of it. It's just that the North Vietnamese are making this too costly for us, just like the Taliban in Afghanistan. Say, well, we could have defeated them. I think that's true. But we just couldn't. Now, I don't think that argument can be made in Ukraine. It's just like we've done everything. You see, we're giving the best of our best, and it's still none of it's working. And that's going to be hard to explain. They're very creative when it comes to explaining things away and saying that, in fact, this was a tremendous success and they weakened Russia and not what, but it will definitely damage the reputation of the U.S. worldwide. I think more than any of these other wars will, and it will raise a lot of eyebrows and within the U.S. Again, there are people who I'm sure the majority is hard to believe will still, think that the U.S. is number one, that Russia was pathetic, that we taught them a lesson there, whatever. It'll just be absurd. But that's what's going to be said on CNN and Fox News, and that's what most people are going to believe. But the world won't believe it. And there will be a growing number of people within the U.S. that, won't believe it and realize that, we are no longer top dog.
Well, if these dissident parties in Europe, they take over, they maintain control, and then they want to restore relations with Russia, and then they rightly begin to point the finger of this whole conflict at NATO and the United States, couldn't that lead to the disintegration of NATO, the EU,
it could,
and ultimately the disintegration of the American empire? Because really, the American empire.
That's true. Right. Well,
So
I think
that's
you're right.
best hope.
So, yeah, I think so. But it also shows. I think the Americans are going to understand that, and all their establishment friends within Europe are going to understand it. So they're going to fight this tooth and nail. It's going to be an ugly battle. So let's just hope that the good guys win. That's all I can say.
Yeah, the more they fight, though, the more they get exposed. I mean, that's kind of really what's happened. I mean, Trump, you can hate him as much as you want. I'm not a big fan, but the one thing he has done is kind of exposed the establishment and the deep state. They kind of rose to the surface and took their mask off, and everybody's kind of been seeing it. We've seen it. Just narrative control has just been.
I think that's just right. Yeah, I think that's really historically when we look back at the Trump presidential terms, that will be. We'll see that as the main contribution that Trump made to the demise of the U.S. Not the demise of the U.S. I think it's actually very good for the U.S. for the demise of the U.S. empire.
Right. Okay, let's pivot over to the Middle East because there are also some really big news over there.
Yeah.
So Biden announced yesterday that a ceasefire deal was reached, and it seems like it was enforced at 4 a.m. last night. And I was surprised because on Monday we were just talking about it and saying like, these never happen. Right. Israel will say they want a ceasefire, but they put conditions that are unacceptable. But it looks like this is real. This really happened. Yeah. Israel did one last horrific barrage of bombings the final day in Beirut, and then they had the ceasefire. So do you believe the ceasefire lasts, and why did Hezbollah agree to this?
Well, okay. First of all, I'll say I was very dismissive of this. I think it's a case of the boy who cried wolf. We've heard these things so many times, and even claims, like Israel's agreed to it. Because we've heard this so often in the case of Gaza that I just was dismissive. I didn't pay any attention. But it's really happened. Why? Well, I think one thing you should, on the Hezbollah side, they've agreed to do some things that they earlier said they would not do, to stop the rocket barrages. We'll just see if they keep the agreement. Another thing is that they're not supposed to penetrate south of the Istani River. And that was actually part of a previous agreement, like the one that followed the 2006 battle, which Hezbollah clearly won. I mean, they stopped the Israeli incursion, and then they were supposed to stay north of the Istani, but they ignored it. So I think maybe Hezbollah is looking at this and they're saying, okay, basically, I think this is the way they see it, and they may be right. I think probably are right, that Israel got its butt kicked in southern Lebanon. Israel knows it, and they just needed a face-saving way to get out of this. So Hezbollah is giving them that. They can say, okay, yeah, we got this agreement, we got what we wanted, let's get the hell out of here. I noticed during the past 4 weeks approximately, like every week I would hear some report that, okay, Israel has achieved its objectives and is going to pull out of southern Lebanon, which was clearly nonsense. They hadn't achieved their objectives. But I think there was a growing panic within Israel to say, hey, this is not working out. This is just a real quagmire. We're really getting hurt badly here. And we're not going anywhere. Let's get out of here. Let's declare victory and go home. And what they did is, okay, that Hezbollah gave them a way out. And we'll know for sure, let's say within a couple months, if, let's say 2 months from now, Hezbollah is firing rockets into northern Israel, and apparently they've already gone south of the river. There was even a report I saw this morning that they're openly moving rocket launchers around down there, so we'll see. And if we're back to where we were before, and the Israelis have pulled out, and the Israelis don't go back in, we would say that Hezbollah won this. Now, if actually Hezbollah keeps the truce and they just don't fire any more rockets, then you'd have to say that Israel won it. They got what they wanted. They wanted to stop the rocket barrages. And they got it at great cost, to themselves and to Lebanon. But they did achieve an objective. So I think time will tell. Let's just put it that way.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if you're saying that the IDF were getting their butts kicked in southern Lebanon and they're looking for a way out, it's like, why would Hezbollah give them a way out? Why would Hezbollah allow them to save face if they're defeating the IDF in southern Lebanon? Then why let off the gas? It doesn't make sense to me, unless if Israel is just threatening to continually carpet bomb Beirut and civilian cities, that they say, okay, we got to save our own people. Is that the calculation?
Sure. That's part of it. I mean, Lebanon has really suffered, and so it's a good thing if we can stop this, and if maybe we, by doing this, giving a little bit of a face-saving, allow them this face-saving retreat, and then with the understanding among the Hezbollah members themselves that before long we're going to be back to where we were, and we're going to be sending those rockets into northern Israel, and it'll just be a clear Israeli defeat to anybody who's paying attention.
So you think
it's interesting that
Hezbollah...
actually, I just want to say quickly that there was this poll that was recently published in Israel that shows the majority of Israelis do not think that the IDF achieved a victory there. Something like 61% do not think that the IDF, even, with all the censorship and the distorted news, I think most Israelis understand that it didn't go well.
So you think Hezbollah is going to continue to fire rockets? Because Biden is promoting, this is a permanent cessation of hostilities.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's 60 days. And then it's just, like I've said in the past, they've had these, I think there was something similar agreement, in 2006. But essentially what it was just like a face-saving measure for Israel to get out. And immediately, Hezbollah was not supposed to move back in. Immediately it did. But the Israelis didn't do anything because they did not want to go back in. And maybe we're going to see the same thing. That's
okay.
Yeah, well, we don't know for sure. Again, I think time will tell. Let's say maybe 2 months from now or something, the rockets start, they start firing rockets again, and Israel doesn't do anything about it. We know that this was just like a repeat of 2006.
Yeah, well, we know they'll do something about it. They'll start bombing Beirut again, bombing southern Lebanon.
Well, that's one thing is if they start bombing, and it seems like the Israelis just can't help themselves. It's what what they like doing best. Then clearly Hezbollah will have an excuse for renewing the rocket attacks.
Right. I'm just saying if Hezbollah continues to fire rockets, then, Israel's just going to start bombing again. So I just don't,
this
ceasefire doesn't, the ceasefire just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, no, but they will be outside they will have withdrawn their ground forces.
So that's the agreement, not that they won't stop firing rockets, that they'll just pull back, but they can continue to shoot rockets?
No. Okay, it's just that on the Israeli side, the IDF is just retreating. They're already marching out back into Israel. They've given up. And so that's a major victory for Hezbollah, and that they get that from this agreement. If they get back to, okay, firing rockets and then Israel bombing, that's where they were before this whole thing, but minus all the ground forces in southern Lebanon.
Right, but I almost thought that the ground forces in southern Lebanon is where they're dealing really real damage to the IDF.
Yeah, well,
That's
they were, but it's a victory. Again, that's your point, is to drive them out, and if they go home voluntarily, isn't that even better? And then,
I don't know.
If we get back to where we are there, Israel, prior to this ground invasion, Israel was not bombing Beirut. Right? They were bombing targets in southern Lebanon, and not at the rate that they were since the ground invasion. And if we get back to that low-level kind of exchange, that's something that's Hezbollah would be happy to have. I mean, it's obviously in their favor.
Yeah. Yeah, the ceasefire came to me as a bit of a surprise.
Yeah.
It doesn't make that much sense for me. I mean, the Gaza situation is not getting better. It continues. Right. I don't see Hezbollah wanting to stop. They start firing rockets immediately after October 7th. I don't see them just stopping right now.
Right. I don't. So I'm guessing that it's not going to hold for very long. Again, remember, it is a 60-day ceasefire, and you say, well, they achieved something. They got the IDF out of southern Lebanon.
Right, and when I was listening to Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday talking about this and the reasons, and one of the reasons he stated for the ceasefire is that to focus on Iran now. Now is the time to focus on Iran. So,
I think the fact is that he got his own war cabinet, which is full of crazies like himself. They supported it. I think that the reality was something that they simply had to face, and that is that. This was a tremendous diversion of resources, and they weren't achieving anything in Lebanon. So even those crazies, can seem to have a better handle on reality in some ways than our Western politicians do.
Right. Well, the Israeli strike on Iran, or attempted strike, I should say, they didn't seem to do much damage at all. But Iran did promise retaliation, but that seems ages ago now. It's in my distant memory that this retaliation
it actually wasn't that long. It was about, I think, almost exactly a month ago. It's just so much has happened since. Yeah,
right.
Who knows? Well, maybe we find out why. We learned later why they took so long. Apparently there was some promise. The Americans were promising the Iranians that they would achieve a ceasefire. I think Pezeshkian was very foolish to believe that, but he gave him a chance, and when it became clear that they just were never going to deliver it, he fired. And who knows what's happening behind the scenes? They're waiting for the right time, and they will. I don't have any doubt that they'll strike.
Okay, well, great. I mean, my intention is all focused on Ukraine and Russia right now, but I'm sure. Well, both of these things, we keep on saying this. Both of these conflicts are just insane. It's just insane what's happening right now. I mean, I mean, there's never been anything like this during your whole lifetime, right? I mean, we're living through a very momentous
nothing like
right?
Nothing like. Well, first of all, there were never any wars in Europe. The first one was, of course, in the former Yugoslavia, but that was over pretty quickly. And
the Balkans.
At that time, Russia was very, very weak and wanted to support its ally, its historical friend, Serbia, but just could not. And so there just wasn't any question as to what the outcome of that war would be. But this is different. It's just, it's just always, from the time that I've been following wars and politics, it's just that the United States was the colossus. First they had one rival, and that was the Soviet Union, and that's what shaped everything. And that actually kind of enforced a certain peace on the world, because there were these two great superpowers, that were, in military terms, were equally powerful. And that caused, as a result, both of them exercised caution. It's when the Soviet Union fell, and then we had the unipolar moment the United States went on kind of an invasion spree. But initially, they were the single hyperpower. And so there really wasn't any danger. They could take on any country and bomb it into oblivion, and we could thump our chest and wave the flag, and that was it. It felt good. It was just like a video game. That's what the wars in the Middle East were all about, and Israel was the regional colossus. But yeah, the difference now is it's just no longer true. It's just that these other powers have risen and can challenge and in fact can defeat their rivals. Iran, I think clearly in a missile war, Iran has a huge advantage. And then clearly in this war in Ukraine, Russia has the advantage, not just against Ukraine, but really against all of NATO. And that's what's really changed everything, and it's changed the meaning of these wars. Now the empire is on the line. It's not just like the existence it's not just an existential question for some small government like that of Serbia or of Iraq, but it becomes an existential question in some senses for both Russia and the U.S., for Israel and Iran. And so we're looking at something. These are very serious wars that are going to really determine the course of history.
Okay, scary times. Let's end it there then, Dad.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.